Hey guys, just wanted to give a quick thought. Welcome to Whatsoever More or Less. I'm thinking about Article 2 of our Constitution, which seems to be a really unique something. I would encourage everybody to look it up for themselves. Don't just take my word for it. Apparently, prior to the Constitution, there were states who had their commander in chiefs. The commander in chief was a thing in Great Britain, what have you. But in our Article 2, the president, he's the only member of the executive branch. The power is vested in him. It doesn't say sole power like it does in Article 1 at times, or all powers like it does in Article 1 at times, or other points. It's not a conditional power or anything like that. As a matter of fact, I find no conditions whatsoever. Um, with the except for a basic check and balance on the treaty power with the president, but it opens up in Article 2, Section 2, um, saying that the president, let's talk about the oath real quick at the tail end of Article 1, Section 1, which the oath says that he will preserve and defend the Constitution. Lincoln used that as a justification for the Civil War. However, the word Constitution at the time clearly did not mean union or boundaries or anything like that. So I will continue to disagree with that forever. It doesn't square, but that's neither here nor there. So he takes an oath to defend the Constitution, to preserve and defend it, what have you. Then he's his first power that's mentioned, or duty, obligation that's mentioned in Article 2, Section 2, and it's probably best to describe it as just a fact, is that he's the commander in chief of the Army and the Navy and the militia when actually called into force. Also, he has the power to propose treaties by and with the consent of the Senate, with the advice and consent of the Senate. And he has the power to nominate people to the different executive kind of, what would you call it, positions, executive branch positions, different administrative positions, uh, again with the advice and consent of the Senate. Um, this is unique. This is not the kind of thing that existed in other commander in chief positions prior to this Constitution, as I understand it. He has the uh, power to propose treaties, so that's international relations, diplomatic relations, has the obligation to communicate what he sees to Congress regarding the State of the Union and what things he sees need to be done. He has the responsibility to meet with and receive diplomats from other nations. So again, this is nothing I see consistent with other, what do you call it, commander in chief positions. And then the biggest deal to me is the take care clause. He shall take care that the laws of the land are faithfully executed. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Article 6, Clause 2, what's the big deal about that? If you ask me, comparing it to it, Article 6, Clause 2 says this Constitution, the laws and the treaties shall be the supreme law of the land. Now, I've recently heard someone describe the Constitution as procedural only, but that cannot be because the Constitution has promises guaranteed. And where promises are guaranteed, it cannot be procedural only. In other words, those promises have to be kept. So that's a mandate. Whether or not there's a punishment affixed for the failure to do so is besides the point. Um, and so, therefore, he shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed. In other words, if everybody else is abdicating their duty, which is a standard complaint from the Declaration of Independence, it's his job to make sure that he doesn't pass the buck any further at that point. I think that even at times it's probably the default position should be that the president's action as opposed to waiting for Congress. I think where there's sudden attacks, now Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 clarifies that states shall not use their military powers unless there's a sudden attack. There is no such clarification in Article 2. Okay? He just has that obligation to the common defense promise of the Constitution, if you ask me. You can say this founder said that, this founder said that. I don't care unless you can prove to me that there was a general consensus from every last one of those founders. But even then, it doesn't matter. It wasn't ratified Okay, so the only thing that was ratified is what's in the text. So I don't care what the founders said. It's interesting for food for thought, but in the end, if you can cross reference the Constitution and find a conclusion that's consistent with their stance, great. If you can't, then no, I just disagree. Okay, and I have that whatsoever more or less stance. Um, or in other words, what's his name? John Taylor, prophet of the Church, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, said, whether they knew it or not, um, God was giving them the Constitution. They were giving, basically, J. Reuben Clark said it's scripture for all intents and purposes, or it's akin to the words of God, as President Benson has said. So their commentary, not so much, just the Constitution itself. We have been told to study the tradition of the founders regarding it, which I find that the tradition of the founders is humility and caution regarding exercising too much powers. But the chief executive is super interesting. I recommend studying it. I would say where the Constitution provides external protections for the people within the United States, there aren't as many checks and balances as there are fail-safes, backup plans. It has to get done, period. Those are non-optional things. And same thing too with domestic violence, just in case. Anything violent, right? Anything that deals with the protection of life. But then when it comes to exercising other powers, all other powers seem to have checks and balances. In particular, the 10th Amendment is a huge one, which there is no way Andrew Jackson. So some people might think, okay, since I'm talking about all these powers that the president has to preserve and defend and to be active, that's only with the stuff promised in the Constitution. That's only with the stuff mentioned in the Constitution. 10th Amendment says if it's not delegated to the federal government nor prohibited to the states, it remains either with the states or the people. 9th Amendment makes clear there are all sorts of other powers that weren't mentioned in the Constitution. And if we haven't mentioned it, for now it's reserved to us until further amended into the Constitution. This was the big mistake of Andrew Jackson, which he set the precedent then for Abraham Lincoln, if you ask me. Okay, I'm going to blame Jackson more than Abraham Lincoln. I think he was completely out of line, threatening South Carolina. No one in the Constitution had the power to determine constitutionality of anything. It wasn't clarified. Now, where President Trump is dealing with a perceived threat, an ongoing state of wars, I agree with Alexander Hamilton's examination number 1 after the Barbie Pirates incident. Yes, President Trump is in line, unless they're lying about. But look, when we gave our consent to this Constitution, we gave our consent to state secrets. We gave our consent to their judgment. And so I really recommend studying. We're seeing something very unique. You do not see this in traditional commander-in-chiefs prior to the Constitution. This is really, really something unique. The president is right now in Beijing, as far as I understand, maybe not now at this point, but meeting with Xi, all that kind of stuff, negotiating, working things out. This is different. It's a little bit kingly, except for he's always removable. You have to remember this. If he's really committing major offenses, he can be impeached. The sole power, remember, the Constitution clarifies where there are sole powers, and where it doesn't say sole powers, we have to assume that it's not intentionally meant to be an absolute sole power, right? The sole power of impeachment is in the House of Representatives, and then the Senate can try it, right? So they can remove him if he's violating things. They can defund him, right? The power of the purse. So they can control him. So he's not a king, and then he's got limits to when his term ends. That's all there is to it. But it's actually really quite interesting because as you said it, you realize the take care clause is the biggest deal. That take care that the laws are faithfully executed, especially when you cross-reference it with Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause. And yeah, I shouldn't say completely, but mostly disagree with the idea that the Constitution is strictly procedural. I say that the Constitution contains purposes, positions of powers, procedures, powers enumerated, powers prohibited, promises guaranteed, and then the procedures. I don't know. I skipped one. There's like 7 P's I always mention. But anyhow, it contains those things, and those promises guaranteed. They have to fall under the take care clause. I can see no other reasonable interpretation of it. Our founders needed a stronger central government after things like the Shays Rebellion. They needed somebody who was able to respond quickly. So that's my thoughts. Look up Article 2, study it for yourself, cross-reference the whole Constitution. His powers aren't conditional, and Congress's powers over war type things, they aren't sole powers. They're not exclusive powers. Um, and there's evidence of sole exclusivity, all that kind of stuff, and conditionality throughout the entire Constitution. Yet it's not mentioned when it comes to things like the president's ability to respond to threats. So, uh, and he's really more king-like than any other commander in chief. Anyhow, prior to, we really have a unique Constitution. And as President Benson said, as far as he knows, it's the only one that God has ever endorsed. So, uh, other than that, we uphold the principles of Constitution everywhere we've been told. And but that's my thought. Thanks for listening. See ya.